Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, area schools are midway through their school year almost, and it's time to look at what's happened this year, but also look to the future. And today we're looking at the Joplin School District. Joining me, Melinda Moss, the Joplin School Superintendent. Thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
If someone comes up to you and asks, well, how are things going in the Joplin School District these days? What do you say?
Things are going great. I feel like we've got good positive momentum happening, and it's been an exciting fall, highlighted by our football team.
Right.
We're still marching through the playoffs. We're undefeated and might even get to go to state. And with that, the enthusiasm that our community brought to our homecoming parade, the first one we've had in decades.
Going down Main Street, Joplin, right?
Yes, and there was a great turnout, and we just really felt the love and support of our community, and that seems to be continuing.
So you're seeing more growth as far as community support, community interest in what's happening in the schools?
Yes.
And tying that together. How about on the academic side for students? And the people want to know, how are the students doing? We always hear comparisons and so forth. In
Sure,
academics. We're
seeing some improvement there as well. We just recently got news that our ACT score again has increased. So our ACT average for our graduates went up this past year, and it did the year before that, and that's a nationally normed exam that colleges and universities use for placement, and most of our kids do take the ACT, so we were very pleased about that.
And then I recently heard a program as far as going to the other end of the scale. The kindergartners have a new program that's maybe not book focused, but it's still life skills.
Yes, it's a great boon to our ability to increase our students' health and wellness, not only for now but lifetime wellness, and our community raised the money necessary to match a foundation grant through the Strider Bike Company, and now all 11 elementary schools will have a classroom set of Strider bikes that our kindergartners can, as part of their curriculum this spring, learn to ride a bicycle.
Right, and that really ties into Joplin putting in more bike trails, walking trails, but that they can go out and use these in those facilities.
Yes, it does, and hopefully this will impact not just our kindergartners, but their parents and the rest of the community, as they can now go out and enjoy those trails.
Good. We mentioned 11 elementary schools. People are curious as far as maybe the population, the numbers of students attending Joplin schools. How are we looking as far as that?
We're up a little bit in enrollment, and I think last time I looked it was around 130 more kids this year than last year. So all in all, we have about 7,600 students, and we're also increasing our online opportunities for students.
Okay, and that's a new approach for many schools, that you don't have to necessarily be in the classroom for that.
Right.
And tying
it
that
expands their opportunities.
Now I know you have, we still call them newer schools that you've had within the last few years, and those were built for growth for the future. Are you feeling those, meeting those needs?
Yes, we have our newer buildings, and then we also have some challenges with some of our older structures.
Good. Well, that's what we're going to focus on today, some of these challenges we've been hearing about, and it's not an overnight thing. I know people have talked about it for a while, that you have some facilities that really need to be looked at. So let's start off with that process. People said, well, we have these new buildings, but we also have some older ones. So how the process the district's gone through?
Well, it all started back last winter, and from time to time the board endeavors to look at long-range facility planning, and so back at the first of the year we formed a facility committee, and that was made up of not only current board members but also some past board members, some faculty, administration. We even had a student and some community members on our group. It was about 22 in all, and we started just taking a long-range look at the entire district. We toured many of our schools, both old and new, and we looked at capital outlay budgets. We looked at what we're planning just in general maintenance, because you need to have a replacement cycle, because we know that roofs don't last forever. HVAC units have useful lives. School buses have useful lives. These are all capital outlay projects that we are able to plan for and keep in the budget and now have on a replacement cycle.
Right.
What we don't have sufficient is if we were to go out for a major construction project. But we looked at all that. We looked at climate and culture surveys, demographer studies of population shifts and growth patterns over time, and after touring several buildings, the facility committee really honed in on our need for all campuses to be safe.
Right, so safety is being a primary concern?
Safety was a primary concern. Equity among our campuses so that all of our students are getting high quality classrooms and we're able to provide a balanced deployment of resources.
So you don't have the haves and the have-nots just because of the building. Correct.
And making sure that we're meeting adequate standards for all of our students. And so some emergent issues came out of that. And Kelsey Norman being out of space and still having to employ a trailer there for classroom use, as well as our West Central and Columbia elementaries.
So those became the three focuses of schools that we have some concerns about. We need to start looking at how can we address these concerns.
Yes.
And you mentioned that this committee involved the board members, but it sounds like you also had a lot of community input as far as the process as well.
Yes, we did. We felt that was very important to get their perspective because it's all our schools.
Now, Joplin, with 11 elementaries spread throughout the community, you have a lot of the neighborhood school concept, they used to call it. So you feel a lot of people have pride of that school that's down the street from where they live.
Oh, yes. There's a lot of identity there.
And tying all of that together. So this study was conducted, then they brought it back to the school board.
Yes, they brought it back to the school board in the spring and made that presentation. And then, even after that, we endeavored to have 6 community forums that we could present information before the board actually made a decision to go forward with the proposed plan.
And so where were these community forums held? A little bit
They were held Irving Elementary, and we had them at West Central. We had them at Columbia. I think we had a morning and an evening at all of those locations.
So people who live near these schools of concern or that had a chance to hear about it. And so forth. Well, I know we have some visuals we'll be referring to as we go along, but talking about the different situations, going back to the point that you mentioned safety, and safety also tying into the learning abilities that you have within a classroom.
Yes, when you look at our strategic plan, it's student readiness, learner support, but also being effective and efficient. And when you get to that third goal about being effective and efficient, that's where you see in our strategic plan most of the language around safety, equity, and making sure that our deployment is balanced.
Okay, so that strategic plan really fell right in place, or as we were looking at things, how are we meeting our goals that we've set, the board and the administrators have set?
Yes, and we presented that strategic plan to the committee at our very first meeting, and so there were aspects of that that really resonated with the committee.
So they really had some guidelines to go by, some specifics. It wasn't just opinion, I think, this year. This is what we're looking for. This is our plan.
Yes, and I think that's what's been beautiful about the strategic plan that was developed when Dr. Ritter was here, and then we've continued to revise it each year, but it has held true to the business of what Joplin Schools should be about, and it's been a living, breathing document, and not just something we set on the shelf and drag out every 5 years.
You want to refer to it, are we meeting these goals? Are we meeting the concerns?
We use it daily.
Well, I know you mentioned some of the facilities, so we have some slides we'll look at. Kelsey Norman's one that you mentioned, and you mentioned the modular classrooms, or people call them the trailers. So what kind of situation are we facing at the school there?
Well, this is a picture that you see on your screen of Kelsey Norman, and that is the modular classroom, and it sits behind the school, and we have classes that take place in that building. The problem with Kelsey is that we just need more space.
There's too many students for the facility.
Yes, and so we have our special classes like art, music, they're having to share classroom space, and I think on your screen now is some of the priority concerns that came out of that look. And then also just students going outside to access those classrooms, and concerns with weather and energy efficiency, and then the sharing of classrooms, as well as we have need for tutoring and places to work with small groups. We don't have that at Kelsey, and we have inadequate space for our school counseling program. So storage is an issue there, and so just the challenges of trying to squeeze more into that building. It's a fine building. The classroom sizes are adequate. It's just that we need a few more. So an addition to Kelsey has been proposed.
So you have the land or the space for an addition. You just need to be able to build something there other than a modular classroom that we saw.
Yes.
And tying that together.
Yes.
And then so that would incorporate facilities that will allow for things like you said, music and art, and separate meeting places for counselors.
Yes, exactly.
And that sounds like that was something that probably involved a lot of input from the teachers and the people at the school as well.
It did, and And as we proceed and go from visioning to actual schematic drawings and planning of what that space specifically will look like, we will continue to get input from our educators.
Great. Okay, so that one is a matter of we have a building, it functions, as you say, the building itself is in good shape. We just need to be able to make more space for people.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Is that an example of an area that has seen a growth in population, that part of town?
Pretty much growth, not rapid growth, but some.
Okay. So
And then just as programming needs and education changes over the decades, some of that is born out of that as well.
Yeah, in the old days you used to have a multi-purpose room. Everybody just kind of shares it. Now you want to have more specific needs.
Yes,
and time
but some of those flexible learning spaces are still necessary.
Okay. Now, 2 schools you mentioned, West Central and Columbia, and I know we have some more visuals to go along with some of those. West Central, if you drive down 7th Street, you recognize it all the time.
Yes, and that was part of the issue when we refer to the street you see in the screen in front of West Central. If we could go back to that photo,
picture and see that.
You know, I would argue, is it really a street at this point? Because that building was built in the 1920s, and when that was built to house our students, I don't know that it was envisioned that we would have a 4-lane highway within mere
2-lane
feet.
7th Street. Yeah.
Within mere feet of where students come in and out. We have buses that line up there on the east side of the building, perpendicular to the street that you see there. And some of the teachers that came to our input sessions, they shared, and it really touched my heart, particularly one gentleman that does bus duty in the afternoons. And as kids pile out of there, what do our babies want to do at the end of the day?
I want to go run and have fun.
They want to run and have fun, exactly. And it scares him to death trying to keep them corralled and not running on to 7th Street.
Right.
And so safety was really the #1 concern of the committee as they looked at where that is positioned.
And that
nowadays.
being a major thoroughfare through town, you're getting big trucks, a lot of heavy traffic. It's not just a residential neighborhood.
And from my office, driving to different points of the district, I go down that street quite a bit. And I've kind of paid attention to the traffic as it's moving through there and watch my odometer. And it seems like about 40 miles per hour is the average.
Even though you may have the signs that are flashing saying school ahead.
Yes, so that was one of the concerns. Safety was the priority concern there. And also you see on your screen the classroom sizes. If you look at those classroom sizes, as well as at Columbia, are 651 square feet. And so in the 1920s, when classrooms were built, we didn't have maybe more than a wooden chair with the sleeve desk that
they didn't
came
use that
over.
kind of space.
We didn't have technology like we have today. Nobody had envisioned students using Chromebooks for assessment or instruction, or even the size of textbooks nowadays.
Right.
So when you try to cram even 20 kids, 20, 24, you know, a regular classroom size of kids in those 651 square foot classrooms, they're very inadequate, and you're kind of stepping over one child to get to the next
to the
one.
other, and they're bumping elbows with each other.
Yes, and I talk a lot about 21st century learning needs. Nowadays, if we don't know the answer to something, what do?
They pull up their computer.
We Google it. You know, that has become, I think, a verb in our society is, you know, just Google it. And I tell teachers, if you can Google the answer to a question, it's probably not a good question to be asking kids nowadays. It's more in terms of, can they be critical consumers of that information? And can they do something with all the information that's flooding us and be able to ferret out what's good information from not accurate information?
Little higher thoughts and learning.
Yes. Can they collaborate? Nowadays with our smartphones, we're kind of all sitting together alone sometimes. And so can we work together cooperatively, and can we design a project, or can we solve a scenario and come out with a solution? Those are the skills that our employers are asking for. And so in a space so tight, when you want kids to work in groups and collaborate and move about, it's just not possible.
You're in rigid rows of chairs and you can't move and talk to each other.
Yes, and so that's a real concern in high quality classrooms. And most of our school buildings now have classrooms anywhere from 900 to 1,100 square feet. And that's typically the industry standard for today's schools. So what we're looking at West Central and Columbia are very small regular classrooms, and those present challenges
as far as
well.
modernizing and what you need to adapt to today's needs.
Yes, and then if you think about handicapped accessibility, because in the 1920s, Public Law 94-142 had not even been envisioned.
Nobody thought about that.
Nobody thought about special education and handicapped accessibility. So we're grandfathered in on many aspects because of the age of the buildings, but we have some students that live in those zones. When you talk about neighborhood schools concept, that's near and dear to a lot of people's heart, but they've chosen to live in those zones, but perhaps their child cannot attend school in their neighborhood, and we're having
like a 2 or 3 story building, they can't get upstairs.
Yes, and we're having to send them to other campuses because those campuses are so small and they're not handicapped accessible. So there's an equity issue there as well. Cafeteria, libraries, computer labs, I could go on
All
and
those
on.
support around the classroom are also very limited.
Yes.
How about the actual size of the property itself? When you drive by 7th Street, of course, you see the big building.
Right.
You don't realize what's behind it. You know?
Right. Well, we looked closely at that because that's a 4.3 acre site on West Central. And we even looked at, okay, if Columbia is our most dire need, then is there a way to merge the campuses? Is there a way to remodel? We tried to look at every possible scenario. Just to the north of that 4.3 acres is a row of houses and whatnot, but when we investigated, okay, if we bought up property, adjoining property, there's a railroad easement that cuts diagonally right through that property to the north, and the street is heavily used, which would be a problem for the city to close that. So it really became impossible to make that site continue to work, and you still have the problem of the proximity to 7th Street.
Right, you're not going to stop that traffic that's going to continue.
Right. So the building itself structurally is pretty sound. It does have 90-year-old infrastructure, but structurally it's pretty sound, and given the location, I think it could be a great asset for something for our community. It's just not making sense 90-some years later to be a public school.
To be a classroom situation for students.
Yes.
Right. Now you mentioned Columbia, and this is where something I know you have a number of pictures involved with it, talking about safety and security, but to help identify Columbia, it literally is in the middle of a neighborhood.
It is. There's no parking lot at Columbia, for one thing, and it's 2.7 acres, and a lot of people don't realize how small
that little lot is.
How small a footprint is when you're trying to put 200 students out there.
And when the parents are coming and going, even if they walk to school, you still have a lot of traffic.
Yes, so we have that. We have buses and cars mixing in front of that building, and that's never a good thing. And what is different about Columbia versus West Central, on West Central we're worried about them running out into the traffic. At Columbia, our students are just kind of scattering at the end of the day. And what a lot of parents gave testimonial to during this process was that they're parking a couple, 3 blocks over because they don't want to get into the traffic.
Because they can't get close to the quote front door.
And so we have all these little kids that are just scattering to meet their parents wherever they happen to be parked. So our teachers don't have good control visual on making sure that our kids are safely getting into the car they're supposed to
make
get
it
into.
to their parent.
Because we like to have from the exit to the car or to the bus to know that they're safe. And then those same issues that we talked about with West Central in terms of small classroom sizes, but we have geotechnical issues at Columbia and a lot of significant cracking and settling there that we're not seeing at West Central, but that makes it even more of an emergent need.
So the physical aspect of the building. Let's go back to the slides and look at some of the other points. I noticed that you had on the slide that we just took off a moment ago talked about secure entry area as well, that that people with lack of secure entry.
Yes, our entry at Columbia is the only building that does not have a vestibule. So at all of our other campuses, you basically have 2 double doors you have to get through before you have access to the building. In today's climate and culture, we worry about security. At Columbia, which we have a picture a little bit later, that's it. There's a little square box there that you see to your left, and you can buzz that, and once you go through those doors, you're in the building. And you can run up the stairs or go wherever you want to, and we just don't have that good access through the office. to screen
check in
visitors.
at the office to see where you're going and what you're doing.
They can just take off through the building, and that was a priority concern of the group.
Great. Let's move on to the next picture then and see what we have for this within the building.
This is within the safe room. And Columbia was the last campus when the district endeavored to put safe room and gymnasium space on all of our existing buildings after 2011. And originally they were going to place that on the southeast corner of the lot. And so in the process of site preparation, opened up a mining void. And we have some pictures later of that. But ultimately it was moved to the southwest corner of the campus, and there's evidence that soil boring and all the tests were done, but we know that here in Joplin, you can move 3 feet over from where you made a
shaft
test.
Here, but not there, right?
Exactly. And so what's happened, probably due to unsuitable soils, is what the engineers are telling us now. There's been cracking and settling, and so that dark line you see to the right is where we have our most significant crack. I will tell you, this photo was taken about January, February, and that crack has increased significantly since this picture was taken.
He's actually sizing it up at the first of the year. That's an index card that somebody's using.
That gives you some scope, and you'll see she's wearing a sweater. That's Shally Lundine's hand, our principal there. But it's larger now. We have crack monitors that watch for that, and it goes up and over and across. And so with the last movement that occurred, we've actually closed that to occupancy.
So it's not used for anything because it's not safe to be inside.
We're just being extra cautious, and we have a lot of engineers and different groups that are helping us watch that have the expertise. And with the last measurements that were taken, it was felt that we need to figure out some sort of temporary fix, even to use it over the next couple of years until perhaps we can get a new campus built. And so we're looking at that now.
So that really eliminated another safe room for the community as well for the storms.
It did. And so our community, if they need to use a safe room, they need to go to West Central. And then our students are having to go down into the basement part of that old 1920s structure. And it's a little scary down there.
An old basement, I'm sure, does not attract the students.
No, it's a dank, dark, scary place. But it's what we have for now. But it's not what I think we can do the best for our kids.
So that building, basically, the committee and the board feels it needs to just be replaced. It's not really there to function as a classroom facility.
That's right. And we have some pictures not just of the safe room, but of the 1920s structure. If we could pull
go on
those
to some
up.
more pictures here.
And that kind of illustrates what we're talking about. But when they started to work on the site originally for the southeast corner of the 1920s structure, we've always had some cracking on that side. Over time, you're going to have settling and cracking. But I think that work probably just accelerated the issues that we have. And this is on the southeast corner, one of our library windows. And you'll see that you might have some cracks and things that you could repair with some tuck pointing. But when your window lintels start breaking, then you know that more is happening.
There's something behind that that's not right.
And as we've monitored those cracks, they're accelerating. And so the next picture, I think, shows perhaps, yes, this is just above that library on the second floor, and we've pulled back some of our carpet squares and the baseboard to show there's actually about 1.5 inch gap that runs all along the southeast wall, up the eastern wall, and the north east wall of that building. So about 1/3 of the building now has the walls pulling away.
Gapping.
So you can drop stuff down into the library from that floor, and that's not good.
Not a good situation. The building is not staying together. Right. And then I think we have one more picture. This shows your gap meter for you.
Yes, we have crack monitors all over now, and Anderson Engineering comes out and takes readings of those quite frequently, and then we send that to structural engineers then that analyze that for us, because we want to make sure that it continues to be safe for our students until such time as we can do something about that.
Well, turning to doing something about it, you're looking at making a proposal to the community in April then.
Yes, it would be a no tax increase bond issue, and we are able to do that because when our bonds were originally structured, enough time has passed that the amount of levy, which is 91 cents, in our debt service is sufficient if the voters give us permission to restructure our bonds and extend the time of our bonds. Then that could generate up to $25 million for us to be able to then have adequate funds to combine West Central and Columbia at a new location that's large enough to handle that and take care of our two oldest and most emergent needs, as well as make the addition to Kelsey Norman.
So the process to come is the school board then will, I guess, formally approve presenting this to the voters. And
yes, and right now the district, alongside our construction manager and our architect, which have been chosen, the boards chose Corner Greer as our architect. Chad's working very hard on that. And then Crossland Construction will be our construction manager, and we're using a construction management at risk format, and that's something new that schools are able to access in Missouri, and it really presents a three-part then team between construction manager, architect, and school to thoroughly vet potential sites and figure out what are the geotechnical issues, how economically can we build this, because we're all working together from the beginning.
it's not this party does their job and their party does their job. You're working as a team.
We're working as a team. And then, so the challenge now is to investigate any proposed property that is given to us, in which we are.
You're looking into possibilities, right?
Yes, and hopefully the board will have enough information that they can make a decision at the end of November, 1st of December is what we're shooting for, because our voters really need to see when we come back from Christmas break, they really need to have a vision of what this could be and where it could be, and that we can involve them in giving as much information as possible before we get to the no tax issue in April.
Right, so this is kind of the step one, getting the information out to the voters, to the residents in the district, and then also then following up with more details. Here's what we're talking about doing at this place. Here's what we want to do here.
Absolutely. We want to do this with transparency. We want to do it with professionalism, and we want to honor our community and be good stewards of what we're given.
Right. Well, I look forward to finding out more and following along as we go into the spring months then and give more information for the viewers.
Excellent.
And I'd like to thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and thank you, the viewers, for joining us this week. And I'd like to thank you and invite you to join me again next week at the same time on this station. We'll see you then.